You may know me for a few things, but you probably don't know me as the Ubisoft guy. Like, oh look, it's the Ubisoft man! It's not often that I'm championing Assassin's Creed, or Far Cry, or Just Dance, but back in the day, I really did love a lot of their games. And right now I'm playing Rayman in the Phantom Show for Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. And by the way, I bought this game just for the Rayman DLC, because Rayman is such a special character to me, a big childhood favourite. But it wasn't just Rayman, it was Beyond Good and Evil. It was Prince of Persia. And I am so excited for the new game. So much so, that I want to talk about somewhat of a hidden gem. This game. When Prince of Persia made the jump to 3D, it truly redefined... Wait, what game is this? We're talking about Sands of Time, not Prince of Persia 3D, or Arabian Nights Prince of Persia for the Dreamcast. Why are the titles different? And the box art change is very funny. Sands of Time came at a very good moment for Ubisoft. Yeah, it was one of the best games of that generation, and faithfully adapted many elements of the original while standing on its own as a tight individual entity. But it also had the opportunity of being completely unrivaled. See, for many, Tomb Raider defined the PlayStation 1, and its big PS2 debut wasn't great, and then it pretty much sat the generation out. Now, there's a ton of differences between Tomb Raider and Prince of Persia, but for slower, acrobatic platforming and crypty environments, this was an easy choice. Look at how the cloth moves so naturally on PS2. Angel of Darkness could never do this. In fact, many modern games could never do this. Sands of Time still stands as my favourite in the series, but the whole trilogy was great and kept evolving the tone and gameplay, releasing exactly 1 year apart. 2003, 2004, 2005. Good lord! Then, this happened. With the jump to the next generation, Ubisoft were readying a new Prince of Persia game. Prince of Persia Assassin. Do you know where I'm going with this? Here is a demo from 2004 running on PlayStation 2 hardware. They had the pushing through crowds thing nailed way back then. Was that the first thing on their whiteboard? Like, you must push through a crowd. We're not making this game without this pushing technology. Prince of Persia and Assassin's Creed are very different games, but because the climbing is pretty similar, they're not different enough to naturally coexist. And so fans of the tightly designed linear platforming adventures in Prince of Persia suddenly stopped having their yearly adventures. Instead, this would have yearly adventures until the end of time. But clearly, some people at Ubisoft didn't want to wave goodbye to this series, and attempted to differentiate it from Assassin's Creed with a bold new style that's gone down as one of the best looking and best aged games of that generation. People hated it. While it reviewed pretty well and is much better regarded by fans these days, Prince of Persia 2008 was a controversial release that left behind the tone that people loved in the Sands of Time trilogy, with something lighter and brighter, at least on the face of it. And you couldn't actually die, the most controversial thing of all. So Ubisoft went back to that whiteboard, they scrubbed off the thing about pushing through crowds and said, "What about Jake Gyllenhaal?" What do you mean by that? He's not Persian. Make a tie-in game too. Okay. But don't base it off the movie. And make 4 of them. Make 4 different games. Make sure the title is the same on each of them with the same box art. Make sure the stories are completely different. Are you okay? Prince of Persia: The Forgotten Sands released 2 years after the reboot and pretends that game didn't happen. This is a return to the Sands of Time trilogy, taking place just after the first game. But what do they mean by that? I don't know. Look, there's an HD version, a Wii version, a DS version, and a PSP version, and not one of them shares a single thing in common. So when I say Forgotten Sands takes place after the Sands of Time, I don't know which one I'm talking about. I mean, you can tell by the title that I'm focusing on the Wii version, but quickly, let's look at the HD version that released on 360, PlayStation 3, and PC. The primary version. And it's okay. Extremely derivative of Sands of Time, especially the opening, which is beat for beat pretty much the same. They really want you to know they're going back to Sands of Time, huh? The big gimmick of this one is large-scale battles, where the screen gets filled with enemies that all just sort of wait around for you to hit them. Other than that, it's a very basic Prince of Persia, which is inherently kind of a good thing. It's just not a very daring thing. Playing these two back-to-back really exemplifies how by the numbers Forgotten Sands HD is. It's not a particularly great-looking game either, and I guess that kind of came at the cost of hitting the movie deadline. It's mostly an animation thing, to be honest. The Prince's run is so meandering. There's just no presence behind it, whereas Prince of Persia 2008? That's a solid run! Most of the budget absolutely went to this version, with CG cutscenes, more explosive set pieces. There's even some cool puzzles where you can slow down time and use water as platforms. It's honestly very rad. All in all, not a bad game, but not a very memorable game. The DS version was an entirely touch-based 2D platformer, which I don't want to play this. PSP got a 2.5D platformer, that's way better than DS, but it's still nothing really that special. And then there's Wii, in my opinion, the best of the bunch. Unlike the HD version, which told the story of the prince's brother unleashing an army of the dead, the story's already kind of started before the game has. There's a tiny bit of backstory. So basically, the prince has picked up a genie called Zara in a market, and she's granted him 3 wishes: having his own kingdom, having a princess, and the gift of immortality. Except the kingdom he's been granted is a decaying one under attack by a sorceress, and the princess needs to be rescued. He got bamboozled. It's a very simple plot of making your way through the kingdom and trying to get it back, but having the genie with you the whole time gives the two a constant back and forth, and it's really fun, even if the plot is pretty thin. There's a lot of personality, way more than the other versions, and it's the same Yuri Lowenthal prince from Sands of Time as well, not the Nathan Drake from 2008.
No! Fertile ground is clear. Princess?
So, the immortality thing. At first you may think, oh, so it's like 2008, but no, it's really not, it's just like Sands of Time. Just instead of rewinding time, you're put back automatically at a save point, which is kinda lame. It achieves the same thing, I guess, but it's just not as fun. If you run out of sand, you get put back to the last save point, which is exactly how the other games worked. So really, it's not anything like 2008, it's pretty much like Sands of Time, but just a little bit not as cool. But many do cite Forgotten Sands Wii as starting life as a follow-up to the 2008 game. They weren't made by the same developer. One was Ubisoft Montreal, whereas this one is Ubisoft Quebec, and I can't find any actual evidence of this being true. But clearly elements were inspired by that version. Namely, the art style, which I absolutely adore, way more than the HD version. I mean, look at the prince. Even if the HD version goes for a more realistic style, it's really flat, whereas this one is way more expressive. Also, the run is way better. It doesn't just have a good art style either, it runs at 60 FPS, unlike the 360 and PlayStation 3's 30 FPS. It just feels better and more fluid. That heavy, slow feel to the prince is long gone here, purely in game feel, and I think artistically, Wii is leagues ahead. The platforming itself isn't simplified or anything, it's the same as it's always been, but whenever you lean into a jump, you get a little line showing exactly where your jump will go, so you know if it's going to be successful or not. That's kinda neat if it were an option, but it definitely takes away some of the challenge and thrill because you can't turn it off. And while a chunk of the game is your typical Prince of Persia wall climbing, wall jumping, wall running, swinging, slashing, it gets so much more interesting in the second half when it fully embraces the Wii remote. For a bit, I thought this was just a good, original Prince of Persia game, but then it skyrockets. It dips its toe at first, like there are specific colored platforms that only activate when you point and click on them, which left me thinking, like, why do I have to do that? It feels kind of meaningless. But it's a precursor to a way more interesting power of placing hooks anywhere you want. As in anywhere. So you'll often see these big platforming arenas where the path isn't exactly clear, and you've got to make it yourself. Put a hook on the wall, run over to it, run off the hook, jump off the wall, place another hook. During the first half of the game, I was questioning why Forgotten Sands wasn't the same game on PSP as it was on Wii. I mean, many other multiplats do that, but they go all in on the Wii features as it goes on, and it's all the better for it. It isn't just pointing at orbs in the correct order to open a door, there's absolutely rad as-flip stuff in here. You can also point at the floor, which creates a gust of wind, which is essentially a very tall starting platform. And the best part is when level design encourages you to use everything. Using that gust of wind to get higher, wall running up, placing a hook, jumping over the room, using the ability that puts you in a bubble to essentially double jump. When you're in the bubble, the cooldown for the hook goes down, so you place another hook, and then you jump out of the bubble into a hook. And it becomes such a unique flow, and it's more memorable than any other version because of all this stuff. And half the game barely even has this stuff. It starts as a typical Prince of Persia, but becomes a really cool Wii Prince of Persia. There's even Mario Galaxy 2 style co-op where the second player can slow down traps and things. It didn't have to be here, but cool. The pace barely slows down either. You're constantly moving forward from one intrinsically designed platforming fest to the next, and occasionally, it even embraces the series' roots with 2D sections. And these play better than the PSP game, which is built entirely around that. There aren't that many of these, but there are some bonus levels which play entirely around this concept, so if you want more of it, there is more. And speaking of extra stuff, check this out. You can unlock the original Sands of Time model. I mean, the face doesn't animate in cutscenes, but still, it's really, really cool. Oh, and the full-blown original Apple II Prince of Persia is here too. You can find it as soon as you finish the opening just by going behind this waterfall, and then it's yours to play, the entire game. They don't re-release this version very often, although the original Sands of Time, not the HD version for some reason, did have it, although it's way into the game, whereas this is right at the start. So even if you don't care about the Wii version Forgotten Sands, which you should because it's rad as flip, it's also just the cheap version of the first Prince of Persia. It might even be the cheapest way to play this game. So, is it all just pros? Is this secretly the best Prince of Persia game? Well, they were distributing budgets for 4 games with a movie deadline coming up, so what do you think? I think there's meant to be more layers of audio here. It's very quiet. Everything going okay over there? The biggest meh part is the combat. I wouldn't say this was a series that ever had incredible combat, it's always just kind of there as a hurdle to get to the platforming. But here they always use very boxy, very video gamey arenas. The way in and ways out always get blocked off until you smack everything on screen. And of course, there's a lot of waggle. You unlock new abilities like being able to throw enemies, running up a wall and leaping off, jabbing your blade into them, and some other neat stuff. But if there was ever an opportunity to just sort of nudge them off the edge and make them fall, I'd always take it. Bye-bye. There's at least a lot of enemy variety, but I don't care what they look like, they're getting nudged off! There aren't that many boss battles, only a handful really, but at least they had the idea of making platforming a core component of these fights because there isn't really that much to the simple sword combat. Though, amusingly, I went back to this boss arena after defeating the boss, and I don't think the game expects you to do that. I'm fairly certain the boss is still here, you just can't see them. What's happening? It is messy in areas. I don't always jive with these pointing at door puzzles, especially in the late game where they throw nonsense like this at you. You want me to remember that pattern while it's rotating like this? What more do you want from me? Please go back to rotating. But when it's purely about platforming, especially in the second half, Forgotten Sands Wii is some of the most fun I've had with this series. It's clever, imaginative, and brought me straight back to when I admired Ubisoft games. Prince of Persia, Beyond Good and Evil, Rayman, and Splinter Cell were among my favorites of that era, and nowadays the only Ubisoft games that have me cheering are, actually maybe the future's gonna be okay. When you have all your abilities, it feels like the game is begging you to break its design too, which in this era didn't happen much. Like now we've got games that give you such open mechanics where the objective is pretty much to mess around with them and do it your own way. But Forgotten Sands Wii rode that train over a decade ago. You'll use all your abilities to roam somewhere that feels like you shouldn't be, like it's out of bounds, but then the devs say, "You idiot, you were meant to go there, you fool!" I don't like these points though. You know in some games when progression doesn't stop, but it kinda does at the same time? Like, oh, there's a big door, we can only open it by going through these 4 small areas to open the big door. There's quite a bit of that here. Like it's always moving forward, but because of that approach, you don't always feel it. I especially don't like the end because of that, and you keep repeating the same puzzle that my brain is too small to figure out. I've got little monkey brain, how do you expect me to do this? 4 times! I wonder what the hint is for the final boss. Attack the sorceress to weaken her. Did Stockman write this hint? This game does have its problems. I'm not saying the Wii version of a somewhat rushed movie tie-in that had 4 different games and isn't really a movie tie-in is secretly the best game you can ever play. But when it's good, this is damn spectacular. It was so rare that AAA developers put resources like this into a Wii game. This feels like a core Prince of Persia like any other, and overall, I think it's the best Prince of Persia game this era gave us. I like 2008, but it's also quite repetitive in areas with combat that I don't really jive with, and Forgotten Sands HD, it's alright. But in Forgotten Sands Wii, the prince is hotter, the platforming is cooler, the extras beyond the core game are extensive, and some of the visual spectacles are brilliant. If you think you've played all the gems that Wii has to offer, or think you can call Prince of Persia quits after the Sands of Time trilogy, give this a go. It takes a little bit to really find its identity, but when it really becomes a Wii game, it can really be one of the finest AAA games on the platform. Apart from this jump. I don't know why, but it wouldn't let me have this jump in particular. Just let me land! What did I do differently there? The Wii is one of my favourite platforms just because it's so full of hidden gems. You can go to any secondhand store and there will be a mountain of Wii shovelware, but somewhere within that pile is bound to be at least something good. And I hope at least one of you goes into that mountain of shovelware and picks out Prince of Persia Forgotten Sands, because it genuinely is one of the best Prince of Persia games, and it's so fun placing your own hooks and just interacting with Prince of Persia in a way that no other game in the series comes close to. So yeah, this is genuinely a good game. Well done, French people. Let's give them a round of applause. Ah, France. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This kind of video is only possible thanks to our supporters over on Patreon, so thank you to each and every single one of you. And even if you aren't a patron, thank you for just watching this video. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to give you all a big old hug. Come here.